How much camping knowledge has been lost in the last 2 generations? Because we stopped passing it down in person and started buying gear to solve problems that our grandparents solved with whatever was in their pockets. My grandfather camped across the Ozarks and the Appalachians for 50 years before he took me on my first trip at age 9. He did not own a single piece of gear with a brand name on it that cost more than $20. He was never cold, never wet for long, never without fire, and never without a solution. I have been car camping for 20+ years, and I am still finding notes I took on those early trips that taught me more than a decade of buying gear. What follows is his list, filtered through 20 years of my own field testing across the South and Southwest, with the things that still work and a few where I found a better version of what he was doing. Stay to the end because the last one is the only fire starting method I have seen work reliably in driving rain with wet wood, and it is not one that shows up on any gear company's website. My grandfather grew up camping out of necessity, not preference. He learned from men who did not have the option of driving to REI if something failed. That mindset produces a very different kind of problem solving than the gear purchase approach most of us default to. The hacks in this video are organized around that mindset. Use what you have, understand why it works, know when it fails. Starting with fire, because fire was the category my grandfather took most seriously. Petroleum jelly cotton balls are the fire starter my grandfather used, and the one I still use after 20 years of trying alternatives. Take a cotton ball and work a small amount of petroleum jelly, the same product that is in a $2 jar at any pharmacy, into the center of the cotton, not saturated, just worked in through the middle. The outer fibers stay dry enough to catch a spark. Light it, and you have a flame that burns for 3 to 5 minutes, long enough to establish kindling in most conditions. The petroleum jelly acts as a slow-release fuel, feeding the flame from the inside, while the cotton fibers provide the initial catch. Store them in a standard pill bottle, roughly the height of a lip balm tube, which holds about 12 to 15 balls and seals tightly enough to keep them dry in a wet gear bin. Next, the entire kit costs under $3 and fits in a shirt pocket. I have started fires in the Pisgah National Forest in October, rain with these when everything at the campsite was damp. They work. The failure mode is sustained, driving rain before you light them. Water getting into the cotton fibers from outside while you are handling them in the dark degrades the catch. Keep the pill bottle in a sealed Ziploc bag and do not open it until you are ready to use one. My grandfather kept his in the breast pocket of his jacket, where his body heat kept them warm and his jacket kept them dry. Steel wool and a 9-volt battery is the backup my grandfather always had in the kit. Touch both terminals of the battery to a pad of fine-grade steel wool, the kind from a hardware store, roughly the width of your palm when spread flat. And the fibers heat and ignite within 2 to 3 seconds. The electrical resistance in the fine metal strands converts current to heat faster than the steel can dissipate it, and the result is immediate ignition. This works in damp conditions because the electrical ignition does not depend on friction or spark. The failure mode is storage. Keep the battery and the steel wool in separate bags. My grandfather stored the battery in his fire kit tin and the steel wool in a sealed bag outside it. If they contact each other in a gear bin, they ignite. This is a bad situation in a truck bed. Char cloth is what he used as tinder with a ferro rod, which is a metal rod that produces sparks when struck with a scraper, and it is still the most reliable spark-to-ember transfer material I have ever used. All cut old cotton denim into squares about 2 inches on a side, roughly the size of a large postage stamp. Place them in a small tin with a single nail hole in the lid. Heat the tin over a flame for 10 to 15 minutes. Wood gas escapes through the hole as smoke. When the smoke stops, the char cloth is done. Let it cool sealed, then store it in a dry container. A single piece catches a ferro rod spark immediately and holds a glowing ember long enough to transfer to a tinder bundle. My grandfather made char cloth from old shirt fabric and kept a week's supply in an Altoids tin, roughly the size of a deck of cards in his pack. For tinder bundles, when everything is wet, he shaved wood curls from the dry interior of split firewood using a knife. The inside of any piece of split wood is dry, even when the exterior is soaking wet. Thin curls shaved from the inner face of a split log catch and hold a flame from char cloth much better than the wet outer bark you might otherwise try to use. Keep the curls together in a loose bundle and light from underneath. I use this method specifically in the Cherokee National Forest in November, when shoulder season rain leaves everything on the ground saturated. For the campfire layout itself, my grandfather used what I now know is called a top-down fire. The largest logs go on the bottom. Progressively smaller wood goes on top in layers. Kindling and tinder go at the very top. You light it at the top, and it burns downward. The advantage over the traditional teepee or log cabin fire is that it requires almost no maintenance. The fire establishes at the top and burns down through the fuel progressively, leaving a long-lasting bed of coals without constant attention. For car camping, where you want a fire that sustains itself through the evening without someone feeding it every 20 minutes, this is the setup. My grandfather built these for every overnight camp without exception. Moving to shelter and sleep, where he had opinions that contradicted most of what I see in camping gear marketing. His first rule about sleeping was that the ground was the problem, not the air. He slept on a folded canvas tarp with a wool blanket above and below him, long before foam pads were commercially available, and he understood intuitively what physics confirms. The ground pulls heat from your body through direct contact far faster than cold air does. Cold air is a convection problem. Cold ground is a conduction problem, and conduction is about 25 times more efficient at heat transfer. A wool blanket between your body and the ground addresses the conduction issue. A wool blanket above addresses the convection. He was warm in conditions that left me in a synthetic sleeping bag wishing for more. The modern equivalent is a sleeping pad with adequate R value. R value is the thermal resistance rating of a sleeping pad, with higher numbers meaning better insulation. A standard blue camp foam pad runs around R 2.0, roughly the thickness of 2 stacked paperback novels. A quality 3-season inflatable runs R 3.5 to R 5.0. The pad matters more than the bag for staying warm. Because it addresses the conduction problem, the bag cannot. A 20-degree sleeping bag on a thin pad in 40-degree temperatures will leave you cold. The same bag on an R 4.0 pad will be comfortable. My grandfather knew this without the terminology, his hot water bottle method I covered in another video about sleep systems. The principle still applies. A hard-sided Nalgene bottle filled with near-boiling water, wrapped in a wool sock before it goes into the foot of the sleeping bag, provides 3 to 4 hours of radiant heat to the part of the body that loses warmth fastest. Feet are the furthest from your core and the first to feel the cold. Address them directly, and the rest follows. Make sure the lid is fully tight before it goes in the bag. I learned this the hard way on a trip in the Nantahala National Forest in late September. For Camp Kitchen, my grandfather's hacks are where I find the most overlap with what experienced car campers arrive at independently after enough years. Soap the bottom of pots and pans before putting them over an open flame. A bar of soap, the plain unscented kind, rubbed over the exterior bottom of the pot before cooking over wood fire, creates a layer between the metal and the carbon soot. After cooking, the soot wipes away with the soap layer rather than requiring scrubbing. This is not my grandfather's invention, but he used it on every trip. It works on cast iron, stainless steel, and aluminum. It does not work if you get the soap on the cooking surface inside the pot, so rub carefully. 1 bar of soap lasts an entire camping season for this purpose and costs less than $1. Eggshells as a camp scrubber. My grandfather never brought dish scrubbers because he made one from breakfast. Crushed eggshells in a small amount of water create a mildly abrasive paste that removes stuck food from camp cookware without damaging the surface. Cast iron benefits from this specifically because it does not like soap on the cooking surface. Eggshells clean it effectively and cost nothing beyond the eggs you were already eating. Rinse the pan after and heat it briefly on the stove to evaporate any remaining moisture before storage. Pre-mixing spices at home into sealed plastic drinking straws. Cut a straw into segments about 2 inches long, which is roughly the width of 3 fingers held together. Seal one end with a lighter. Fill with your measured spice blend. Seal the other end. Label with a marker. You arrive at camp with exactly the right amount of seasoning for each meal. Nothing measures wrong. Nothing spills in the gear bin. And cleanup is the straw going in the trash. My grandfather did this with paper tubes, but the straw version is better because it is waterproof. For eggs specifically, crack them at home into a water bottle or squeeze bottle and refrigerate. Transport in the cooler. At camp, shake and pour. No cracked shells in the cooler, no mess, no broken eggs smeared across your food bag. You can add a pinch of salt before sealing, which helps preserve freshness. A standard wide-mouth water bottle holds about 6 eggs, roughly 1 full breakfast for 2 people. If you are getting something out of this, hit subscribe. More of these coming. Foil packet meals deserve their own mention because my grandfather used them long before they appeared in camp cooking guides. Heavy-duty aluminum foil, a double layer for anything with liquid, meat and vegetables seasoned and sealed in a packet, placed over coals rather than direct flame. Cook time is 15 to 30 minutes depending on thickness. No pots, no pans, no cleanup beyond the foil. He made these at home before trips and stored them raw in the cooler. At camp, they went directly from the cooler onto the coals. The failure mode is thin foil that tears on rough coals. Use heavy-duty foil, double wrap, and place on a bed of coals rather than active flame. For water, my grandfather filtered through a folded bandana before boiling. The bandana catches particulate, sand, and debris. Boiling kills biological contaminants. Together, they handle most field water situations. The bandana is not a substitute for a proper filter for Giardia and similar microorganisms, which require either boiling, chemical treatment, or a certified filter. But the bandana pre-filter step extends the life of any commercial filter significantly by preventing particulate clogging. I run this before my Sawyer squeeze on every backcountry water source. Pre-filter, then filter. The bandana is always already in the kit for a dozen other uses. A wire mesh in a metal tin with a small hole in the lid converts punk wood, which is semi-rotten dry wood that holds embers, into char cloth equivalent material. The punk wood charred in the tin becomes a reliable ember-catching tinder that my grandfather preferred to commercial alternatives. Fine standing dead wood that is dry but has begun to decay, crumbling slightly when pressed. That is punk wood. It will not survive rain, but dry punk wood in a sealed bag is a reliable fire-starting material that costs nothing and can be found at almost any campsite in the eastern United States. For lighting, my grandfather carried candles and a headlamp and nothing else. His observation was that most artificial lighting at camp is used at too high an intensity for too long, which wastes battery and destroys night vision unnecessarily. His rule was this: use the minimum light required for the task. Candles at the campfire circle. Headlamp on the lowest setting for navigating camp after dark. Eyes adjusted to low light navigate a familiar campsite easily. Eyes that have been in bright light for 2 hours cannot find anything in the dark without a headlamp pointed directly at it. My grandfather walked a dark campsite with a single candle and knew exactly where everything was. I use a headlamp on its lowest setting for the same reason. The Petzl Actic has a 100 lumen low setting that is more than adequate for camp navigation and extends battery life dramatically compared to running it at high. A crayon burns for about 25 minutes and can be used as an emergency candle. The wax is similar composition to candle wax, and the paper wrapping serves as a wick. Stand it on a flat surface, light the top, and you have a flame long enough to read a map, organize gear, or signal a position. My grandfather kept 3 crayons in his fire kit as backup light sources. Total weight is less than 2 ounces, roughly the weight of a standard key fob. For first aid and health, his approach was prevention rather than treatment. Hot spots on feet become blisters if you do not address them before they become blisters. The moment you feel friction on any part of your foot, stop, remove the boot, and apply athletic tape or duct tape directly to the skin over the hot spot. The tape layer reduces friction between your skin and the sock. It does not take pressure off the area. It reduces the mechanical motion that causes the blister to form. My grandfather carried a small roll of medical tape in his shirt pocket, specifically for this. Do not wait for the blister to form. Treat the hot spot. Waiting costs you 2 days of painful hiking. Baking soda paste on insect bites reduces the histamine reaction that causes itching. Mix a small amount of baking soda with just enough water to form a paste, roughly the consistency of toothpaste, and apply directly to the bite. The alkalinity of the baking soda neutralizes some of the mild acidic venom and compounds in mosquito saliva and reduces the inflammatory response at the bite site. My grandfather swore by this. I use hydrocortisone cream from the first aid kit for serious reactions, but the baking soda paste handles ordinary mosquito bites effectively and weighs almost nothing. A travel-size resealable bag of baking soda runs about 2 ounces, roughly the weight of a set of car keys, and covers this application plus fire smothering odor control in the camp kitchen, and teeth cleaning in a pinch. Tweezers for tick removal, fine-tip tweezers, not the blunt kind. Grasp the tick as close to the skin as possible and pull straight up with steady pressure. No twisting. Twisting risks leaving the head embedded in the skin, which creates a secondary infection risk. In after removal, clean the bite area with antiseptic. My grandfather monitored bite sites for redness or expanding rash patterns over the following week. Tick-borne illness was a known risk where he camped in the eastern mountains. He took it seriously without being dramatic about it. For gear organization and repair, a handful of things he carried that most gear lists skip entirely. Safety pins. My grandfather had a dozen safety pins in a small tin in his pack. Fix a broken strap, close a torn seam temporarily, pin wet clothing to a line, secure a bandage. The safety pin is one of those tools where you do not think about needing it until you need it, at which point you are very glad to have it. Stainless steel versions resist rust in wet conditions. A set of 12 costs under $2 and weighs less than a business card stack. Alm dental floss as heavy-duty thread. Unwaxed dental floss is stronger than most sewing thread and is in most people's hygiene kit already. Thread a sewing needle with floss and you can repair tent fabric, sleeping bag, baffles, gear straps, and pack seams in the field. The repairs are not beautiful, but they hold. My grandfather sewed a torn rain jacket seam with dental floss during a trip in the Smokies, and it held for 3 more seasons before he replaced the jacket. Keep a needle taped inside the floss container so they stay together. A ceramic mug turned upside down for knife honing. The unglazed ceramic ring on the bottom of most ceramic mugs is a mild abrasive. Hold the knife at 15 to 20 degrees, which is roughly the angle of a ramp used for wheelchair accessibility. One can stroke the blade across the ceramic ring with light pressure, alternating sides. This does not sharpen a dull knife in any meaningful way, but it hones an edge that has gone slightly soft, restoring the bite on a blade that was cutting adequately but has degraded over a day of camp use. My grandfather used a sharpening stone, but when that was not available, the mug bottom was his field solution. Paracord inner strands for sewing or rigging. The outer sheath of paracord contains 7 inner strands, each of which is approximately equivalent in strength to a thin fishing line. Strip the outer sheath and pull out the inner strands for fine repairs, emergency fishing line, or any application where the full paracord is too thick to thread through a small opening. A foot of paracord produces 7 feet of working line from the inner strands. A 10-foot section of paracord, roughly the arm span of a tall person, gives you 70 feet of inner strand line. This is not a substitute for dedicated fishing line, but it is a functional emergency alternative. Reflective tape on guy lines. My grandfather used light-colored cotton cord on his tent lines, which was the best option available to him. The modern equivalent is a strip of self-adhesive reflective tape wrapped around each guy line at shin height, roughly the height of the middle drawer in a filing cabinet, which makes the lines visible when a headlamp or flashlight sweeps the area. Trip on a taut guy line in the dark at full stride, and you will understand why this matters. The one roll of reflective tape covers every line on a full camping setup and costs under $5. Here is the one I mentioned at the beginning. My grandfather's fire starting method for wet wood is not exotic, but most people do not know it because it requires understanding how wet wood actually fails as fuel. Wet wood does not refuse to burn because it is impermeable to fire. It refuses to sustain a flame because it takes more energy to evaporate the surface moisture than the initial combustion can provide, so the flame extinguishes before the wood reaches ignition temperature. The solution is to address the moisture before you try to light it, not during. Split the wood. The interior of any piece of wood is dramatically drier than the exterior, even in rain. Split every piece you plan to use before you try to light anything. If you then build the fire starting with the finest possible tinder, the petroleum jelly cotton balls or char cloth, and the smallest possible kindling from split interior wood. Get those established before you put anything larger on. As the fire builds heat, add progressively larger split pieces. The exterior moisture on the larger pieces burns off as steam as the piece heats, and by the time the interior reaches ignition temperature, the fire below is hot enough to sustain it. This is why splitting the wood before you try to light anything is not optional in wet conditions. My grandfather never arrived at a campsite in rain without immediately splitting a pile of wood, regardless of whether he was going to build a fire that night or the next morning. Dry interior wood available on demand changes what wet conditions mean for a camp. A thread on Camping Forum a few years back asked experienced campers what single skill they wished they had learned earlier in their camping lives. The top answer, by a significant margin, was fire building in wet conditions. Not any specific technique, just the underlying understanding that wet conditions require different preparation, not different luck. My grandfather's answer to this was splitting wood first and worrying about everything else after. It holds up. His 40-second hack, and the one he said came from his own grandfather before him, was this: leave the site better than you found it, not in an abstract way, physically better. Pick up what was there when you arrived that was not yours. Restack the fire ring rocks if they have scattered. If there is a fire ring at all, use it. Do not add fire rings. Do not add impact where there is none already. This is not sentimentality. It is practical ethics for a shared resource. Every campsite you visit has been visited by thousands of people before you and will be visited by thousands more. What condition it is in when you leave is your contribution to every one of those future trips. My grandfather never left a campsite he found messy and never left one in worse condition than he found it. That is not a hack. That is just the minimum standard. The other 41 things on this list are practical and testable. Take the ones that apply to your current setup, run them on your next trip, and pay attention to what changes. His knowledge did not come from gear. It came from understanding what was actually happening and working with it rather than against it. That is the part that does not go out of style.